Now we're going to go to Hank Long, who's a journalist at Alpha News, which specializes in Minnesota politics and has been covering Walz for a long time. We were just talking to Scott Jensen, who said that Minnesota media has had a light touch on Walz for a long time. Well, that's where Alpha News comes in. They are not. Hank, great to talk to you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today to help you guys understand a little bit more about this new national politician.
Yeah, right. So, well, we need to. What is Minnesota saying right now about their governor being the VP pick?
Well, that depends on who you're reading and who you're paying attention to. Like I said, I work for Alpha News and cover legislative issues and state political issues. The flagship newspaper in Minnesota is the Star Tribune. I don't know if you can see the headline. The Star Tribune happens to be run by a former confidant and cabinet member of Walz's administration. His name's Steve Grove, and he was hired in 2023 to take over leadership of the Star Tribune. And he was hired directly from Walz's cabinet. So if you want to know about politics in Minnesota and you're reading a newspaper like the Star Tribune, you're going to get a very biased interpretation of what's been happening the last 48 hours.
Wow,
but
amazing.
I would say
that's
Minnesotans,
straight propaganda from the administration.
Yeah, Minnesotans who have lived here for a long time understand their media, and some of them will just gravitate to it depending on their political paradigm. But at Alpha News, it's an organization that has really grounded itself in filling a void in the media landscape in Minnesota, and we've attracted a large audience of people that have been kind of fed up with false narratives. And over the last 2.5 years, it's been more than that, 4 years, dating back to the George Floyd riots and the COVID lockdowns that Tim Walz governed over. There has been a lot of outcry from Minnesotans wanting to know the truth. So people like myself working for Alpha News, Liz Collin, and many other great colleagues have really worked hard to help people understand the record and the quote unquote political evolution of Tim Walz. So it's been a busy week.
What are the most important things you think we need to know about Tim Walz?
Number one, he's a true Marxist leaning politician that I think dating back to his early years in Congress, he first ran for Congress in 2006, and he claimed to be a moderate. He was running in southern Minnesota. Mankato is the town that he had lived in and taught in since 1997 or so. And he claimed to be a veteran. He was a veteran for Kerry back in 2006. So he was always quite a liberal, but was like, I like guns. I like my small towns and things like this. Well, that quickly evolved over his career in Congress. And by the time he ran for governor in 2018, everyone who understood politics in Minnesota knew this guy was very far left in his policies, in his rhetoric. And a lot of the narratives you'll see on the national level, especially that were kind of portrayed at his acceptance rally last night with Vice President Harris, are he's the coach, he's the teacher, he's neighborly. It's kind of a facade when you get to know this individual. He's very far left, and he's vindictive in a lot of his rhetoric when people are challenging his narratives. So,
give me some examples, because you're right. That is the framing, that he's like this down home Midwest country guy.
Yeah.
Wears the camouflage hat and hunts and all this, and he's the coach, right? What's the truth?
Well, the truth is Walz has been governor in Minnesota since 2018. In 2022, the Democrats in Minnesota at the legislative level were able to capture control of both the House and the Senate at the state level of politics. And so that gave Democrats under Walz's leadership what we call a trifecta, right? Complete control of government. And that's when I believe Tim Walz revealed his true self. In just the last two legislative sessions, Minnesota has seen its state budget increase by 40% in just the last 2 years. It was an unprecedented, historic budget increase. We've seen far-reaching legislation on abortion access. Obviously, that's the fallout from the Hobbs decision in 2022. And Tim Walz will say this is a sanctuary state. This is a place for people who are seeking abortions to get the dignity and the care they're seeking. He did have an appearance with Vice President Kamala Harris in March of this year at an abortion clinic, a pretty well-known abortion clinic in St. Paul, Minnesota, and he really pumped that up here in the local media, and then in the last few weeks as the most historic visit. A vice president or president had never visited an abortion clinic before, and he was honored that Vice President Harris would tour an abortion clinic with him. And he talked about how Minnesota is a beacon for people across the country who are looking for greater access to abortion. Now, pro-life groups and just reasonable advocacy groups have said that Minnesota right now has the most far left abortion legislation in the United States of America. So whether it's taxing and spending on unprecedented levels, really reaching for the brass ring when it comes to a lot of these social and policy issues, Tim Walz has revealed himself in the last 2 years to be a governor that is not anything close to a moderate. He's about as far left as anyone in my state has ever seen. I grew up here. Tim Walz grew up in Nebraska. He's not from Minnesota. He likes to pretend he is from here. He's lived here for, 30 years technically, but he spent 12 of those years in Congress. And he's lived in the governor's mansion for the last 6 years. So a lot of people don't really think that the down home Tim Walz connects with the folks that have been born and raised here.
That's right. Tell us, maybe we only got about 2 minutes. We can spend some time with the next guest about his reaction during George Floyd. I want to ask you to give us some down and dirty on what happened with the fraud. There's a couple different fraud cases in Minnesota underneath his reign, but tell us the big COVID one.
Yeah, well, I mean, the COVID fraud is really what it comes down to is there was a series of emails that a number of attorneys and journalists uncovered during the pandemic of quite a few exchanges between Walz and his health commissioners, various members of his cabinet, and then public relations strategists that were trying to help his administration develop narratives to keep people locked down, to keep sports shut down for youth, schools locked down. And there was two periods during 2020 and 2021 where Walz, I guess, squeezed the most that he could out of his emergency powers that he had been prescribed by state statute. And Alpha News and others had uncovered through these emails that the numbers that the administration was referring to when it came to COVID spread and the narratives that they were telling us about how young people playing hockey in hockey rinks or playing out on baseball fields outside were somehow causing older people in long-term health care facilities to contract COVID were completely concocted. And we have emails to prove it that are public now, where these officials in the healthcare administrative state has said, we don't have numbers. We need to be able to help tie youth sports and people gathering to people getting sick in nursing homes, and we need to do it now. And I mean, the record is out there. The emails are public. There were legislative hearings on this.
Let me just cut you off here because we only got about a minute. And this is great. This is a great point about Tim Walz. When I said COVID fraud, that's not even the story I was referring to. I was referring to the feeding the children COVID fraud.
Oh, yes.
But it's great that all I had to do is say COVID fraud, and it's like multiple stories.
Yeah, you're talking about the actual Feeding Our Future related, that's what it's called. It's an organization called Feeding Our Future. And during COVID, there was a federal program where money was filtered down from the federal government, and states were able to allocate it to all sorts of organizations that would be feeding kids while they were not in school. And there were a number of organizations, and the biggest one was Feeding Our Future, that was based in Minnesota, claimed to feed thousands and thousands and thousands of kids meals that they weren't getting because they weren't in school, right? Because the Walz had shut down school. And lo and behold, almost every one of these reports of feeding kids were concocted and false. Some people were allowed to do this for 18 months before anyone in state government, including Walz himself and the Attorney General Keith Ellison, ever, quote unquote, caught them red-handed. $250 million for fraud.
Yeah. 18 months, $250 million. Amazing. Hank Long, incredibly important in this whole conversation, of course. Alpha News, which is where, if you live in Minnesota, certainly you need to go to get the true story of what's happening in that wonderful state. What's the website, Hank?
Yeah, it's alphanews.org. Pretty easy.
Beautiful. Hey, man, keep up the great work, and let's spread the word. And that people are like, oh, that's just the vice president. No. This is how Kamala Harris would have governed if she's ever been governor. And this is how they will govern if they ever get the White House.